Can you really get things done in the government sector? The answer is yes, but only if you do it right. First thing, avoid all or nothing scenarios. By trying to convert everything all at once, you're more likely to have things not work out well. Eric Ries uses an example of medical devices having a speedier FDA approval process. That's a Food and Drug Administration process in the US. And the way he describes it is them using 1 or 2 pilots where the people who are actually piloting the particular device, as well as the FDA, are all aware that this is a pilot scenario. Compare that to the recent rollout of the Affordable Health Care Act and the challenges that they had with the computers when everything was rolled out at once and the computer systems crashed immediately. So you want to avoid an all or nothing scenario because it's going to give you a better chance for success. Number 2, gather a team. You need a great team when you're working in government, and you need an insider who's going to help you navigate the government. This is a person who knows, hey, if you do this, we're going to have to talk to the legal department. Or if we want to get those parts, we're going to have to request bids. You want to look for existing internal team members who have been trained to adapt and who are eager to embrace something new. Rees talks about military veterans and other people who've had experience for things like emergency medical care, medical teams, paramedics, emergency response people. These are people who are trained to respond, see all the possibilities, look at the possibilities, evaluate, and make a decision. But also look for standard government workers who see your project as an opportunity for them to grow. People who are eager to take on something new and try something new. Now, remember our housing group from the original story. They were a combination of long-term government employees who were passionate about change and some carefully selected new hires who were willing to go well beyond the original job description and the normal job requirements of a fairly low-paying government role. Almost all of them, as we said earlier, were making a salary that would make them eligible for the same social service benefits they were providing to others, but they were driven to create their own success. And that meant that they were the same people who were willing to change their model, drive their cars into dangerous neighborhoods, and figure out how to operate 11 multifamily properties without a handbook. You need insiders and outsiders on your team in order to make it strong. And you need a diverse team from experience, background, and thought. Create that structure. Consider a couple of different formats for the structure and make sure you have negotiated this up front. You may want to consider a hybrid partnership. The public-private model allowed for some room to bypass the standard government bureaucratic roadblocks. If your structure is well crafted up front, and you better make sure you talk to the insiders first here, the contracts creating the partnership can tilt the project towards efficiency. Some of the different structures that are used are joint ventures, government-sponsored nonprofit product or project incubators, as well as different coalitions of groups putting together for just that particular reason. You want to try to mitigate the most challenging bureaucratic issues of government structure in your structure so that you're able to move reasonably fast. Understand the funding cycle. Understand government funding models. You want to look for opportunities to take already designated funding for something new. If there are X funds allocated for Y programs and only 90% are committed, that 10% is your wiggle room. If something is being slowly phased out and showing declining usage, that may be your window. But don't underestimate it. Everybody else in government is looking at that piece of pie too. So you need to be aware of the openings, aware of what's coming up, any national announcements, any new national movements, if you can mesh what you are doing with that. Set the expectations up front. Lean is a foreign model for most government activities. You may have to accept some constraints on your ability to pivot away from the initial goal. Set the expectations up front. Will there be a radius that the project can pivot in, or must it only get to a fixed point? Can you share it with the public, or can you only share it through a spokesperson? And who is going to own the work product in the end? Commit to a communication plan. Commit to a careful communication plan. While it's tempting to work under the cloak of darkness and not call attention to the project, silence equals conspiracy in the eyes of your detractors. On the other hand, you'll need to consistently and constantly craft that message every time it gets out. If you aren't driving the story, someone else will, and they will tell it for you. You rarely have the startup luxury of being able to avoid hype in this circumstance. Explain your pivots. Accept that you'll have to explain why you pivot to many audiences. Use the data you measure to tell your story, to show the need and why the pivots were necessary. If you move away from your original hypothesis, you need to explain why. You want to consistently demonstrate the human results and also that you're doing it faster or cheaper than an alternate scenario. If your project was originally replacing a traditional project management approach or a traditional solution that was offered, you want to be able to show your costs on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis were less than the traditional costs, so that if you're having a spike up in costs because you pivoted, you want to show that overall this approach has been less costly and more effective. Use innovation accounting to support your actions. How are you going to establish your baseline? How will you measure the results of a pivot? What are the growth drivers and how are you going to determine that? You want to be able to explain this in your numbers and help people understand why you're measuring one thing instead of another. And accept the fact you may have to do some vanity metrics. That's just part of being in government. Let go of your ego. You could never compete with the egos of the average politician. And understand that you may create an amazing project, but the ownership will go to the politician or the government agency that sponsored it. And if you're real worried about who gets final ownership on the project, you better have negotiated that up front. So who's actually creating successful lean startups in government right now? There are actually some really great examples out there. There are some amazing successful projects going on right now in government where people are using lean. Tennessee state government is doing some amazing work around data governance in the Department of Transportation and also reorganizing their GIS information. The New York City Schools has an Innovate New York City Schools project. This is a dynamic project. It continues to grow each year. There's some fantastic information on their website. Take a look. NASA has an amazing open innovation project. This is the space program in the United States, and they are doing amazing work with bringing people in and new ideas to see where it can go. Now back to our original assignment. Everybody got their ACCO clip? Let's remember. Let us review. The 712, 2 3/4 inches long, holds 1 inch of paper. 70324, 2 3/4 inches long, 3 inches of paper. Everybody got it? Now I bet you think that nobody in government uses ACCO clips anymore. I was on a phone call 2 weeks ago with a government agency, a state government agency, and I won't say which, and somebody casually mentioned, and whatever you do, don't send the files over without having the holes punched for the clip. It makes our team crazy. So as many governments are fully moving to a paperless world, and many of us are moving to a paperless world, there are always ACCO clips in any government dealing. And maybe not an ACCO clip, but there will always be the ghost of an ACCO clip. So what happened to the teams we talked about up front? How did they do after they learned and pivoted and measured and adapted? The Homeownership Center achieved more than $53 million in home sales in the first 2 years with an average home price of $70,000. That's US dollars, folks. Over 700 low-income families were able to buy a home at a good mortgage rate in the first 2 years. They negotiated strategic alliances with several banks and secondary market agencies. They were recognized for their work at the White House Conference on Empowerment Zones, won several awards from the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, and received a Blue Ribbon Award from HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They served more than 6 times the contracted clients in the first 2 years, and they served double the number of targeted area clients. The center stayed open for 6 years and was incorporated into the Revitalized Housing Authority, which was now scoring 100 on its HUD score. The model that was created by the center is now used by many housing agencies across the country. The contract administration team wound up successfully overseeing all of the projects. They created ways for the residents to register complaints. They worked with managers on improving property issues. They assisted managers in learning how to document their activities and paperwork in a streamlined fashion. They made surprise inspections and got property managers to make sure the properties were functioning in the best possible condition for the residents. After moving on from these projects, all of the staff have moved into bigger roles. Some work in government agencies, some are community leaders. One is a pastor. There are several leaders in the nonprofit housing world. One created and sold a well-known organizing business, teaching people in their companies how to organize paperwork in their lives. Another one is talking to you today. I would say all have fared better than their counterparts who stayed in the traditional half of the agency and worked from 8 to 5. And what happened when they were audited by another government agency? The Homeownership Center was criticized for serving too many people who met the project income requirements but did not all live in the empowerment zone, even though they exceeded the number of empowerment zone customers in the contract, and the extra people only cost wear and tear on the facilities as the materials were covered by the joint ventures and memorandums of understanding that they had between the private partner agencies. The contract administrator's project was fully audited. The auditors never actually entered any of the projects that they monitored, instead choosing for a windshield tour, which meant they drove by the projects and looked at them and thought they looked okay outside. And they said they looked nice. And fortunately that day the trees weren't burning in front of the Imperial Hotel when they drove by. They also spent 2 days auditing the team's carefully collected data and paperwork, and they noted that the team had missed one very important detail that was apparently carefully spelled out in the manual they'd been unable to find. It was the only finding in the entire report. They had used the wrong size echo clip. So let me leave you with one thing. One final message. The keys to success. Be innovative, be bold, be willing to adapt, and never ever use the wrong echo clip. Thank you for your time. I hope you'll contact me with any questions or suggestions.